Hi everyone, it's Helen Horta here, founder of Form Help, and we are on the australia.gov.au/states website. Now, I've done some guides on how to complete the Australia DPD or Digital Passenger Declaration, and I'm finding that lots of people are asking whether I know what the entry requirements are for each of the different states and territories. So I decided I needed to address the entry requirements for each of the states and territories. Now, before I begin, I have a couple of requests. Now, I have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2022. So if you can help out, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you find this video helpful, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Thanks, everyone. Okay, now let's get into seeing what the entry requirements are for Victoria. Now, as you can see here, we are on the Victoria Government website, and it says information for overseas travellers, information on quarantine and testing requirements for entering Victoria. So as you can see here on this page, these are all the topics that will be covered on this page. So let's go ahead, and I might not cover all of them, but I will cover the ones that I think will be the most popular or the most relevant. Okay, so I'll enlarge that. So it says here, before you arrive in Victoria. Now, all international travellers need the following to enter Victoria. So number one, you need to have an international COVID-19 vaccination certificate or obtain a valid foreign vaccination certificate from the country you were vaccinated in. So if you are coming into Australia, you would have had to have completed the DPD. So as part of your DPD, you would have had to provide evidence of your vaccination certificate. So that should be done there. Number two, test negative for COVID-19. So you need to show proof of a negative COVID-19 PCR test taken within 3 days of your scheduled departure, or a medical certificate as evidence of a negative RAT taken under medical supervision within 24 hours of your flight's scheduled departure to Australia, unless you have an exemption. Now, some countries are exempt from pre-departure testing, and this is a Commonwealth border entry requirement. Now, I know that with point 2 here, it is a requirement for the DPD, so to get into Australia. So I'm sure come the 18th of April, when they scrap the pre-departure COVID testing, that possibly the state and territory governments will update their pages as well. So for now, you still have to follow step 2. So number 3 is ensure all your Commonwealth entry requirements are in order, including checking you can travel and completing your DPD. Number 4 is if hotel quarantine, you need to fill in, if you are going into hotel quarantine, you do need to fill in the Victorian Quarantine Arrival Form. So we are able to support you during your quarantine period. If you fill out before arriving at Melbourne Airport, you will be able to pass more quickly through the terminal, and you can still choose to fill it in once you arrive. So try and get your Victorian Quarantine Arrival Form filled in prior to you arriving into Victoria. Otherwise, it says that you can still fill it in at the Melbourne Airport. However, it might take a little bit longer. So if you want to pass through quickly, then get your Victorian Quarantine Arrival Form filled out before you arrive into Victoria. Now, for travellers who have had at least 2 vaccination doses, here's a quick guide here. So if you have had at least 2 doses of the vaccine and you're aged under 12 and 2 months, you need to immediately quarantine at home upon arrival in Victoria. You need to get a RAT or a PCR test if you don't have access to a RAT within 24 hours of arriving, and continue to quarantine until you receive a negative test result. Now, if you're able to ensure that you take some RATs with you before you leave your country, so that when you arrive into Victoria, then you don't need to try and get out to a chemist to try and find RAT. So yeah, maybe a good idea is to take some in your baggage with you when you travel. So in more detail, so if you have had at least 2 doses of the vaccine and you are 12 years and 2 months, then you must, again, immediately quarantine at home or another private accommodation upon arrival. You need to get your RAT or a PCR test. If you don't have access to a RAT, within 24 hours of arriving in Australia, and continue to quarantine until you get a negative test result. So for the RAT, if you're able to, try and take some with you so that when you do arrive into Victoria, you'll be able to just test straight away within 24 hours. And you can transit directly to another state or territory following arrival in Victoria. Now, while you're in quarantine, you must not share bedrooms, bathrooms, or any other facilities with any other person who is not quarantining, such as any other person who is not within your travel party. Now, while in quarantine, you can only leave home to undertake specific essential activities, which includes getting medical care or medical supplies, COVID-19 testing, or if you are in an emergency. Now, if you leave quarantine for any permitted reason, you must wear a face covering at all times unless an exception applies, and practice physical distancing. And visit the checklist for COVID-19 cases if you test positive for COVID-19. Now, for 7 days after your arrival in Australia, you will need to carry proof of ID, your PCR result if you took a PCR test, and evidence that you are double dosed or exempt, and present these on request to authorities if asked, and comply with all pandemic orders in place. Evidence of vaccination for overseas travellers is: so you need an Australian International COVID-19 vaccination certificate, and if you don't have one of those, then you need a paper or digital certificate, which is in English or accompanied by a certified translation and is issued by an overseas government authority or accredited overseas government vaccination provider, and accompanied by the Australian Traveller Declaration or COVID-19 vaccination and testing declaration that shows the person has at least 2 doses of the vaccine and contains, so it needs to contain the person's name as it appears in their passport, the person's date of birth or passport number, the vaccine brand name, and the date of each dose or the date on which a full course of immunisation was completed. Now, for travellers who do not have at least 2 vaccination doses, so just looking at the quick guide, so if you don't have at least 2 doses of the vaccine and you're aged 18 years and over, you do need to quarantine for 7 days in hotel quarantine, or if you have a valid medical exemption, you need to follow the rules for travellers who have at least 2 doses of the vaccine. Now, if you're aged over 12 years and 2 months, but under 18 and not have at least 2 doses of the vaccine, then you need to quarantine at home or in private accommodation for 7 days after arrival in Australia, and you do need to get a RAT or a PCR test if you don't have access to a RAT within 24 hours of arriving, and continue to quarantine. And in more detail, international arrivals aged 18 and over who do not have at least 2 doses of the vaccine, excluding those with a medical exemption, will be required to undertake 7 days of hotel quarantine. Now, if you are aged between 12 years and 2 months and 18 years and do not have at least 2 doses of the vaccine and do not have a medical exemption, and you are travelling unaccompanied or with at least one parent or guardian who is at least double dosed or has a medical exemption, then you need to quarantine at home or any other private accommodation, including hotels, for 7 days after your arrival in Australia. Now, if you first arrived in Australia in another state or territory before arriving in Victoria, then you must complete what is remaining of the quarantine period since you arrived in Australia. Now, you can transit directly to another state or territory following arrival in Victoria. Now, while you're in quarantine, you can only leave home to undertake specific essential activities, which include getting medical care or medical supplies, COVID-19 testing in an emergency, or if you are leaving Victoria. Now, while you're in quarantine, you must not share bedrooms, bathrooms, or any other facilities with any other person who is not quarantining, for example, any other person who is not within your travel party. And if you leave quarantine for any permitted reason, you must wear a face mask at all times unless an exception applies, and practice physical distancing. Get a RAT or a PCR test if you don't have access to a RAT within 24 hours of arriving in Australia. So if the test result is negative, you are still required to quarantine for 7 days after arrival in Australia, all right? So you don't need to get to this test if you already got it elsewhere in Australia. Now, for 7 days after your arrival in Australia, you need to carry proof of ID and your PCR result if you took a PCR test, and present these on request to authorities if asked. Now, comply with all pandemic orders, and you'll find them in this link here. Travellers who have a medical exemption. Now, if you have a valid medical exemption, you need to follow the same rules for travellers who have at least 2 vaccination doses, which is above. Now, evidence of medical exemption for overseas travellers is a certificate issued by a medical practitioner who is authorised by an overseas government authority or an accredited vaccination provider that is written in English or accompanied by a certified translation that contains, so it needs to contain the person's name as it appears on their passport, the person's date of birth or passport number, a certification from a medical practitioner that the person is unable to receive a dose or a further dose of a COVID-19 vaccine because they have a medical contraindication to all COVID-19 vaccines available for use in Australia or recognised by Australia's TGA, or they have an acute medical condition such as undergoing major surgery or hospital admission for a serious illness. And then you can refer to the Commonwealth border entry requirements there if you need, if you cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons. And over here we have other frequently asked questions, or FAQs. Now the first question, can I request to change my quarantine arrangements? So let's have a look. So you may apply for an exemption from quarantine or to undertake quarantine in another location in exceptional circumstances. So applications will be reviewed to limit the risk of spreading COVID-19. So the request will be considered for certain medical reasons, travelling interstates for compassionate reasons, unaccompanied minors under 18 years old, foreign diplomats and their family, maritime crew members. Now, exemption applications must be made to the Department of Health using the online request to vary hotel quarantine arrangements form. So click on this link here to have access and fill in that form if that applies to you. And the next question is, I have an international COVID-19 vaccine certificate. How do I add it to the Australian Immunisation Register? Now, if you have 1 or 2 doses of an approved and recognised COVID vaccine or COVID-19 vaccine while overseas, you can have it recorded on the Australian Immunisation Register. Now, you can ask a recognised vaccination provider to add your vaccination record on AIR if your vaccine is approved for use or recognised in Australia, you received it on or after the 1st of October 2020, and your vaccination record is in English or accompanied by a certified translation. Now, it can take up to 10 days for your vaccination to be uploaded to the AIR, but once it's updated, you can visit how to get your COVID-19 digital certificates and for information on how to show proof of your vaccination. And again, if you want more information, click on the Services Australia link right there. Now, I am an international tourist. How do I show proof of my vaccination to enter businesses and venues? Now, if you are in Victoria for a short visit and are fully vaccinated with an approved or recognised vaccine, you can use a copy of a paper or digital certificate issued by an overseas government authority or an accredited overseas government's vaccination provider, which shows, so it just needs to show your name as it appears on your passport, your date of birth as it appears on your passport, the vaccine brand name, and the date of each dose or the date on which a full course of immunisation was completed. And your certificate must be written in English or accompanied by a certified translation. And children aged below 12 years and 2 months are not required to show proof of vaccination. Okay, so the next question is, I have a medical condition that prevents me from receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. What do I need to prove this to enter Victoria? Now that doesn't make sense. What do I need to do to prove this so that I can enter Victoria? That's how I'm going to rephrase that question. So you will need to carry with you and present to an authorised officer at the airport one of the following forms of acceptable certification issued by a medical practitioner. Okay, so you need an AIR medical exemption form signed by your medical practitioner, or a certificate by an overseas government authority or an overseas government accredited medical practitioner that is written in English, and it needs to be accompanied by the certified translation of the original. That contains, again, your name as it appears on your passport, your date of birth as it appears on your passport, a certification from your medical practitioner that you are unable to receive a dose or further dose of COVID-19 vaccine due to a medical contraindication. And lastly, a certificate issued by an overseas authority or an overseas medical practitioner is only valid for 6 months from the date of issue and cannot be used as evidence to work on site in Victoria or enter certain premises, for example, restaurants, as a fully vaccinated person. I am an international tourist. How do I show proof of my medical exemption to enter venues and businesses? Okay, so once you enter Australia, you will need to get your medical exemption recognised by an Australian medical practitioner. So the doctor needs to update your record on the AIR to show that you have a medical exemption. Now, once your exemption has been processed, you can download your COVID-19 digital certificate. And then there's a link there for showing proof of medical exemption if you want more information. I am an international tourist who tested positive during the trip. What should I do? So if you are exposed to COVID-19 during the trip, you must follow the guidance of the Department of Health, including getting tested and quarantining at your accommodation until you receive a negative result. So if you do test positive, you will be required to complete quarantine in either a suitable location or a designated hotel quarantine facility, and you will be directly contacted by the department if you do test positive. I need to travel overseas. Do I need a pre-departure COVID-19 test? Now, if you choose to travel overseas, it is your responsibility to obtain information from your airline about the screening requirements for COVID-19 in your destination country, and also check the travel restrictions and how to apply for any exemptions at the Smart Traveller website. You must also obtain appropriate documentation for entry into that country prior to your departure, and please arrange a pre-departure COVID-19 test and proof of results through your GP, travel doctor, or the service provider recommended by your airline. So advice to travellers: check in advance with the airline about the COVID-19 screening requirements for your destination. Check with the consulate of your destination country to understand any COVID-19 related issues and documentation you need for entry. And the Department of Health will not provide you with the documentation for international travel in relation to COVID-19 tests. Okay. Now, what arrangements apply to cruise ships? So for further information on cruise ships, go to this link here, COVID-19 Advice for Travellers, on the Australian Government's Department of Health website. If I can't find a flight back to Australia, who should I speak to? So for information on returning to Australia, go to the Smart Traveller website, and the network of embassies and consular posts around the world will provide you with up-to-date local advice and support throughout this difficult period. Now, do I need to wear a face mask at the airport? Yes, you must wear a fitted face mask when you are in an airport terminal, and a face mask must be worn while on your flight in Australia unless an exception applies. So that is basically it, but if you do scroll down below, there is more information there for you to read. And as you can see, this was reviewed and updated on the 26th of March 2022. Okay, so that is the entry requirements from the Victorian government for overseas travellers travelling into Victoria. So hopefully you found that helpful. And that concludes today's video. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's Helen Hortai, founder of Form Help, signing out. Bye.